Welcome back to our news bulletin. In the UK, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been discharged from the hospital but will not be immediately returning to work. Meanwhile, Spain's daily death toll from the coronavirus has risen by 619 to nearly 17,000. In Iran, 117 new fatalities have taken the tally to nearly 4,500. The global death toll has jumped to over 109,000, including 20,000 in the US, with nearly 1.8 million infections globally. This report will now tell you more.
The COVID-19 has got the world at its wits' end as deaths continue to mount with no vaccine in sight. Governments are torn apart between containing the spread with lockdowns or rescue crashing economies. Iran is allowing small businesses to reopen outside Tehran, while India, Saudi Arabia and Armenia are extending lockdowns. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization urged Belarus to impose new measures to contain the new coronavirus.
Belarus is entering a new phase in the evolution of the outbreak. We are seeing community transmission occurring. This is particularly important in some parts of the country, as well as the capital Minsk. The situation is concerning and warrants new measures to begin and be put into place.
Spain is setting out back-to-work guidelines under a loosening of lockdown restrictions, citing a decrease in daily deaths. Germany has reported 129 deaths in 24 hours, taking the toll to nearly 2,700. In France, the death toll rose by 635 to nearly 14,000.
Si nous faisons l'addition,
if we add the fatalities that took place in hospitals and those that took place in social and medical social establishments since March 1st, we deplore 13,832 deaths in France connected to the COVID-19 epidemic.
Elsewhere, China recorded 99 new infection cases, more than doubling from the previous day to reach a one-month high.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, over 1,000 patients have recovered from COVID-19 across the country. The health ministry says total infections have surged to 170 and the death toll has risen to 88. It said over 2,800 tests have been taken since yesterday, taking the total number to nearly 62,000. The ministry said 51% infections are from foreign countries, while 49% are local transmissions. In another news, Pakistan says India has once again violated ceasefire along the line of control and working boundary, wounding 2 civilians. Military's media wing said Indian troops started unprovoked firing in Shirikot and Shakargarh sectors along the border. Inter-Services Public Relations said Indian forces deliberately targeted civilian populations during firing. The wing said 57-year-old citizens resident of Nangal village along the working boundary sustained critical injuries. It said both wounded have been evacuated and being provided with medical care in the hospitals. Yesterday, 6 civilians along the LOC were wounded due to unprovoked Indian firing. The United States has lauded the Taliban stance and steps against spread of coronavirus in Afghanistan. U.S. Envoy for South Asia Alice Wells says Washington joins Kabul in praising fighters' efforts in raising awareness. In a statement, Wells commented the Taliban's offer of a safe passage to staff working to prevent the spread of the virus. The Taliban have launched anti-COVID-19 drives in their controlled areas, including Laghman and Helmand provinces. The group has established awareness and quarantine centers in these areas to tackle the deadly virus. Afghanistan has reported 18 deaths and around 550 coronavirus infections across the country so far. The Afghan government says it has released another 100 Taliban prisoners under the Doha peace deal. The Kabul administration has released 300 Taliban prisoners so far. The National Security Council says President Ashraf Ghani ordered the release as part of efforts to bring peace in the country. The council said the step has also been taken to tackle spread of coronavirus in the country. Earlier, the Taliban recalled their delegation from Kabul, saying Ghani is delaying the release of prisoners without any concrete reason. Yemen's Saudi-backed coalition says it has killed 38 Houthi rebels during fresh clashes. Fighting in the war-torn country rages on as both sides accuse each other of violating the ceasefire agreed earlier this week. The Yemeni army said it retaliated to multiple attacks by the Houthis in the Sada province. But a Houthi spokesperson accused the coalition of launching 25 raids in the last 12 hours. He said the aggression will have serious repercussions and will lead to escalation. The Yemeni government forces also claimed recapturing of a military camp in the strategic Socotra island. The camp was previously under the control of the Southern Transitional Council separatists. In Israel, President Reuven Rivlin has turned down a request from Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz for a 2-week extension to form a new coalition government. In a statement, Rivlin said the extension would not be possible under the current circumstances. This means Gantz and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have a midnight deadline on Monday to reach a power-sharing deal. If they fail, the country could be forced into a 4th consecutive election in just over a year. The Blue and White Party chief was mandated to form a government in 28 days after winning elections on 2nd March by a narrow margin. Earlier, Gantz said two sides are close to signing an agreement and with additional time and understanding can be finalized. Netanyahu has also called for an immediate resumption of talks in an atmosphere of goodwill. Iran says Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has held talks with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres over US sanctions and Yemen crisis. In a telephone conversation, two leaders discussed impact of sanctions on Tehran's fight against coronavirus. Iran state media says both leaders condemned Washington-imposed curbs on Iran during the pandemic. It said both also discussed ongoing conflict in Yemen and chances of ceasefire amid virus spread. Zarif said Guterres conversed about the plight of Yemeni people due to war and conflict. Iran has recorded 4,357 deaths and over 70,000 countrywide coronavirus infections so far. In Congo, 2 soldiers and 33 militants have been killed during clashes in the gold-rich northeastern province of Ituri. A military spokesman said the government troops fought Codeco militia in the towns of Dearo, Dala, Lipri, and Sheibi in Jojugu. He said the fighting erupted when the militia tried to invade the towns. The military said it seized several weapons from the militants, including 5 AK-47 weapons and 2 PKM. In January, over 200 Codeco militants surrendered to the government forces after a crackdown in the country's volatile east. DR Congo has recorded a second Ebola death in days after over 7 weeks without a new case. Speaking in Beni City, WHO's local officials said the latest victim of the deadly virus is an 11-month-old girl. The officials said the previous case was of a young electrician. Congo had been due to mark an end to the second deadliest outbreak of the virus on record until a case was confirmed in Beni. The outbreak has killed more than 2,000 people since August 2018 in Congo, where militia violence hindered efforts to contain it. In Ukraine, wildfires have reignited in Chernobyl's radioactive forest as radiation readings near the wildfires have been elevated. The fire started on April 3rd in the western part of the exclusion zone and spread to nearby forests. The fires erupted near Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded in April 1986, causing world's worst nuclear accident. The Ukrainian ecology inspection body said radiation in the epicenter of the fire exceeds the norm. The Exclusion Zone Management Agency said fires have burned over 8,500 acres over the past week. The Ukrainian Ministry of Emergencies has deployed 400 firefighters and 100 fire engines to the region, including helicopters and airplanes. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's talk about India, where more than 100 journalists have condemned government's efforts to curb media's freedom of expression and reporting. Uttar Pradesh government has filed an FIR against Siddharth Vardarajan for writing against Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. In a statement, journalists said the FIR constitutes nothing but a brazen attempt to muzzle media in the country. They said Vardarajan only reported about Yogi's activities after government-imposed nationwide lockdown. The journalist said despite complete shutdown, police have ordered the journalists to appear in the UP from Delhi. India's decision to extend the COVID-19 lockdown by 2 weeks has worsened the uncertainty among millions of migrant workers. Ill-planned and abruptly imposed curfew has forced thousands of workers to reside in schools turned into shelters. The officials said they have not received orders from government about proper arrangement and future of these workers. Meanwhile, continuing the hatred, Assam officials have asked not to use relief funds for Muslims. Despite stepped-up measures in the fight against coronavirus, 4 countries in the Southeast Asia have witnessed a surge in cases.
In Malaysia, the total number of cases stands at 4,530, while 73 people have died so far, with almost 2,000 recoveries. Indonesia's number of cases rose by 330, bringing the total to 3,842, with the death toll at 327. After the capital Jakarta, the government imposed comprehensive social restrictions in the cities of Bogor, Depok and Bekasi. In the Philippines, there were 233 new cases, bringing the total to 4,428. So far, 247 people have died in the country from the virus. On Friday, Manila banned healthcare workers from entering and leaving the country during the COVID-19 crisis. In Thailand, 45 new cases were recorded, bringing the total to 2,518. A total of 35 people have died from the virus and 1,135 have recovered.
Italy has supplied German rescue ship Alan Kurdi with food supplies after Berlin called on EU for assistance. Rescue organization CI said enough food was supplied to last for up to 3 days as the ship is still searching for a safe haven. Italy and Malta have refused to allow the ship to access their ports, citing concerns over coronavirus. On Friday, Germany said the government was examining alternative locations for the ship could dock. Christians are celebrating Easter Sunday under coronavirus lockdown in many countries, with empty churches and the Pope on a live stream. At the climax of Holy Week for planet's 2 billion plus Christians, congregations were held at homes to avoid spreading pandemic. This report has more.
Around the world, Catholics followed the papal service or masses said by priests in their own empty churches or on the internet. On Easter Eve Mass in an empty St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Francis urged people to not yield to fear and be messengers of life in a time of death. The vigil, which normally takes place in a church packed with about 10,000 people, was attended by only about 24.
How beautiful it is to be Christians who offer consolation, who bear the burdens of others and who offer encouragement, messengers of life in a time of death, in every Galilee, in every area of the human family to which we all belong and which is part of us. For we are all brothers and sisters. May we bring the song of life.
In a first Easter speech, UK's Queen Elizabeth said Easter isn't cancelled as coronavirus will be defeated with resilience. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, in a rare Easter address, praised the citizens, asking them to continue social distancing in the wake of the pandemic. Steinmeier encouraged strength and solidarity in his speech, as the German government had asked people not to travel during the Easter break.
Good evening, fellow citizens. In a few hours, Easter celebrations begin. Outside, nature is blooming. We go outside and to see each other, loving people, family and friends. Or so we were used to. That was a part of it. But this year, everything is different. It hurts to go without visiting parents. It breaks grandparents' hearts to not be able to hug grandchildren on Easter at the least.
The coronavirus capsizing Easter traditions, Christians are attending church services virtually, setting up camps in backyards.
In his Easter message, Pope Francis has called for debt reduction for poor nations so the world can better fight the economic fallout of COVID-19 pandemic. The Pope's Easter message, delivered from an empty St. Peter's Basilica, was by far his most pressing and political since his election in 2013. He said, "It is time to end indifference, self-centeredness, division and forgetfulness, as the whole world is suffering and needs to be united." The pontiff said politicians and governments must avoid self-centeredness and help each other's populations. Pope Francis also repeated his call for a ceasefire in all the corners of the world and said the pandemic should spur leaders to finally end long-running wars. U.S. Republican senators have urged Saudi Arabia to take concrete action to cut crude oil output. Senators raised the issue during a conference call with Saudi Energy Minister, Prince Deputy Defense Minister, and Saudi Ambassador to the U.S. The call was led by Senators Dan Sullivan, who introduced legislation in March to remove U.S. troops to raise pressure on the kingdom. The legislation also seeks to remove Patriot missiles and THAAD defense systems from Saudi Arabia unless the output is reduced. Sullivan said kingdom needs to take sustainable, concrete actions to significantly cut oil production, and it needs to do so soon. Oil prices had fallen to 18-year low as COVID-19 outbreak lockdown hampered the demand and followed by oil price war in a race for market share. Turkey says volatility in oil prices must end immediately. Energy and Natural Resources Minister Fateh Donmez said price stability is crucial for predictability in the global oil market. Donmez said there should be cooperation between the countries in the supply and demand side of the oil market. He added, while there was a supply and demand balance of 100 million barrels per day before COVID-19, now there is a decline of 20 million barrels per day. Donmez said this is due to the stalled global transportation industry, since 2/3 of crude output is used in transportation. He hoped energy markets return to their competitive nature under normal conditions soon. The World Bank has forecasted that South Asia is likely to record its worst growth performance in 40 years due to coronavirus outbreak. The bank's South Asia Economic Focus report said the region is likely to show economic growth of less than 3% this year. The growth would plunge from over 6% earlier forecasts. World Bank forecast India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh will see sharp falls in economic growth. It said the economic fallout of COVID-19 is expected to send Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Maldives into recession. The report said in an event of prolonged and broad national lockdowns, entire region will experience an economic contraction this year. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.